Beneath a sky choked with ash, Clera's once thriving cities lay in ruins, overrun by the merciless Threx swarms. The Clarins, a proud and influential species, had sent out their desperate plea for help, but the silence from their allies was deafening. Just as all hope seems lost, a voice crackled through the static, a human captain, leading a fleet to the planet's defense. Humanity, newcomers to the galaxy, had always been underestimated, dismissed as reckless and unprepared. Yet, in their darkest hour, the Clarins would learn what true strength was. As the battle raged, one young soldier's sacrifice would reveal the true cost of compassion. With victory came loss, and the question echoed, why did the humans answer the call when no one else did? In the end, it was not weapons or technology that saved Clera, but the unshakable resolve of those who refused to turn their backs. What the Clarins would discover was that the greatest power in the galaxy was not might, but mercy. Clera, once a flourishing planet at the heart of an advanced alien civilization, now lies in ruins. Its once grand cities, known for their towering spires and intricate designs, are now reduced to smoldering wrecks, swallowed by an ever-growing desert of ash and dust. The sky above, once of vibrant blue, is now choked with thick clouds of smoke and ash, a grim reminder of the devastation that has befallen the planet. The streets, once bustling with the energy of a thriving society, are now silent, save for the distant rumble of explosions and the faint echo of collapsing structures. The Clarins, proud and intelligent beings, can do nothing but watch as their world crumbles around them. The Threx, an insectoid species notorious for their savagery, have descended upon Clera like a plague. Their swarms, endless and relentless, sweep across the planet, laying waste to everything in their path. Their tactics are brutal, using overwhelming numbers to crush any resistance. Their ravenous hunger for destruction knows no bounds, and they leave only ruin behind them. Clera, once a beacon of culture and knowledge, has become nothing more than a battleground, its people caught in a hopeless struggle for survival. In the face of such overwhelming force, the Clarins have fought valiantly, but their defenses have proved inadequate. Their advanced technology, once a symbol of their power, is no match for the sheer ferocity of the Threx. Cities fall one by one, their defenses shattered within hours of the initial assault. The Clarins, though formidable in their own right, are outmatched by the swarm's sheer size and aggression. The air is thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and flesh, and the ground is littered with the remains of fallen warriors and civilians alike. Desperation sets in as the Clarins realize that their once strong alliances with other galactic species have crumbled. They broadcast a final, desperate plea for aid across every known star system, hoping that their influence and connections would compel their allies to come to their aid. But as the days pass without any response, the truth becomes clear. The Clarins are utterly alone. The silence from their supposed allies is deafening, and the realization that they have been abandoned sinks deep into the hearts of the Clarin leadership. Ambassador Violi, one of the last remaining leaders of the Clarin Council, stands among the ruins of her world, surrounded by the remnants of her people. The once proud Clarin society is now a shadow of its former self, reduced to hiding in hastily constructed bunkers and underground shelters. Violi's crystallized skin, once vibrant and radiant, now appears dim and dull, reflecting the hopelessness that has gripped her people. Their fate seems sealed, and the weight of it bears down heavily on her shoulders. It is in this moment of despair that, unexpectedly, a transmission breaks through the static, offering a sliver of hope where there was none. Ambassador Violi sat in the dimly lit underground bunker, the weight of her responsibility pressing heavily on her shoulders. Around her, the remains of the Clarin Council whispered anxiously, their voices barely audible over the hum of the emergency systems. The bunker, hastily constructed in the wake of the Threx invasion, was meant to be a temporary shelter. Yet, as the days dragged on and the enemy's forces grew ever closer, it had become their last refuge. Outside, Clera's once beautiful cities were burning, their towering structures reduced to rubble by the relentless Threx swarms. The sounds of war echoed from the surface, but here, in the cold, dim confines of the bunker, there was only silence, an eerie, suffocating silence. Violi's translucent eyes, usually sharp and filled with resolve, now seemed dull with despair. She had fought hard to lead her people, to negotiate, to secure alliances, but now, it all felt like a distant memory. Their last desperate plea for help had been broadcast across every known star system. Every connection they had built over generations, every alliance they had forged with other civilizations, now seemed to be worth nothing. There was no response. No ships arrived to aid them. No fleets on the horizon to push back the threats. It was as though the galaxy had turned its back on them. The Clarins, once a powerful and influential race, had become irrelevant in the face of the overwhelming swarm that now tore through their world. The truth slowly began to sink in. The Clarins had long prided themselves on their wealth, their status, and their vast network of allies. They had believed, perhaps too naively, that these connections would ensure their survival in times of crisis. But as the days passed and the radio silence from their allies continued, the bitter reality became impossible to ignore. They were alone. The Clarins had no friends left in the galaxy. Their wealth, their influence, their technology, none of it mattered in the face of such a dire threat. Violi's heart ached as she watched the faces of her fellow council members, their expressions a mixture of fear, disbelief, and resignation. There were no more diplomatic solutions, no more bargaining chips. The time for negotiations was long past. Outside, the Threx continued their assault, methodical and brutal. Every hour that passed saw another city fall, another bastion of resistance crumbled. Violi had heard reports of the last remaining Clarin strongholds being overwhelmed, their defenders outnumbered and outmatched by the relentless swarms. The enemy showed no mercy, no hesitation. In the distance, the occasional explosion rattled the bunker's walls, reminding them of the fragility of their sanctuary. Violi knew that it was only a matter of time before the Threx found their hiding place as well. It was a matter of survival now, not just for her people, but for the legacy of the Clarin civilization itself. As the weight of their situation pressed down on her, Violi tried to hold on to some semblance of hope. She had always believed in the strength of her people, in their ability to adapt and survive. But now, as she sat in the bunker, surrounded by the ghosts of what once was, it seemed impossible. Her people were dying, and there was no one coming to save them. In her heart, Violi mourned the loss of her civilization, not just for the destruction of their cities, but for the extinction of their way of life. The Clarins would be remembered as a race that had once reached the heights of knowledge and power, only to be erased by the unstoppable force of the Threx. But just as despair threatened to swallow her, a faint crackle over the communications system caught her attention. She turned to the screen, her heart racing, not knowing what to expect. A voice broke through the static, and for the first time in days, Violi allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still hope. The transmission crackled through the static, a faint but unmistakable signal that pierced the heavy silence in the bunker. Ambassador Violi's heart skipped a beat as she straightened, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. The voice that came through the comm system was calm, professional, and unmistakably human. "This is Captain Darius Locke of the Erebus, United Earth Forces," the voice said, strong and steady despite the interference. "We've received your distress signal. Help is on the way." Violi stared at the screen in shock, her mind struggling to process the words. For days, she and her people had been abandoned, their last hope extinguishing with every passing hour. Yet here, amidst the chaos, came a promise of help from a species they had never expected to come to their aid. At first, Violi questioned whether this could be real. Humanity was still a newcomer on the galactic stage. They were known for their reckless ambition and chaotic politics, but their military presence had always been minimal compared to other species in the galaxy. The Clarins had heard of them, of course, but they had never seen them as a significant force, more of a nuisance than anything. Their fleet was small, their technology relatively undeveloped compared to the mighty civilizations that had historically held sway over the galaxy. Why, then, would a human captain respond to their distress signal? The Clarins had long been surrounded by powerful allies, yet none had offered help when their world was on the brink of destruction. Violi was not alone in her skepticism. The remaining members of the Clarin Council exchanged uncertain glances. Some of them dismissed the transmission as a mistake or a prank. Others wondered if it was some sort of trap, another cruel jest by an enemy bent on ensuring their complete annihilation. But the voice on the other end was steady, sincere. It carried the weight of an unwavering resolve, and something about it sparked a glimmer of hope in Violi's heart. She had to know more. She had to believe that the galaxy hadn't entirely turned its back on her people. As the transmission continued, Captain Locke explained the details of their mission. He assured Violi that the United Earth forces were already en route, their fleet mobilized to assist in the defense of Clera. The voice of the captain was full of purpose, as if he was used to leading men and women into battle against overwhelming odds. Violi felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief that help was indeed on the way, that they wouldn't face extinction alone. But there was also disbelief. How could these humans, so new to the vast galactic community, be the ones to answer the call? Why had they responded when no one else had? The question gnawed at her, but there was little time to dwell on it. The transmission cut off abruptly as the human forces prepared to engage the Threx. Violi couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change everything. She had watched her people crumble under the Threx's assault, and she had seen their once sturdy alliances dissolve into nothingness. The Clarins had always been self-sufficient, powerful in their own right, but now they stood on the edge of extinction. And yet, against all odds, a race they had once regarded as primitive and ill-prepared had stepped forward to offer their help. As she gazed at the blinking console in front of her, Violi realized that humanity's intervention might not just save her people, it could also reshape the future of the galaxy. The Clarins were not alone anymore, and perhaps the galaxy, too, would change because of this unexpected alliance. The question now was whether the humans would live up to their promise and whether they could make a difference in the coming battle. The moment the first human ships descended into Clera's atmosphere, the skies above the planet erupted with fire. Earth's fleet, sleek and angular, cut through the smoke-choked sky like a streak of lightning. The ships were unlike anything the Clarins had ever seen, fast, aggressive, and relentless. They glided through the air with precision, their weapon systems engaging the Threx swarms with deadly accuracy. The deafening hum of railguns echoed through the skies as they fired, sending blasts of energy that tore through the Threx ranks. The missiles that followed tore through the enemy lines like a hot knife through butter, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. For the first time in days, the Clarins could hear the sounds of battle not as a grim reminder of their defeat, but as a chorus of hope. Violi watched from the command center, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected to see the humans falter, their inexperience on the galactic stage showing through. But what she saw instead was a well-coordinated, disciplined military force in action. The human fleet, though small compared to the mighty Threx, fought with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. The Threx, in their overwhelming numbers, had been relentless, but the humans did not retreat or hesitate. They pushed forward with every attack, every strike, and their soldiers fought with a determination that seemed to defy logic. It was as though they had something to prove, something to fight for beyond the battle itself. At that moment, Violi began to realize that the humans were not just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for something greater, something worth more than just their own victory. Captain Darius Locke himself led the charge, piloting a smaller, more nimble vessel into the heart of the battle. His ship moved like a living creature, weaving through enemy fire with an agility that seemed to mock the Threx's brutish swarming tactics. The humans didn't fight like the other species Violi had encountered. They didn't fight with overwhelming numbers or superior technology, but with sheer, unyielding will. Locke's voice crackled over the Clarin comms, steady and calm despite the chaos around him. "Hold your position, Ambassador Violi. We've got your back," he said, A simple declaration, but one that carried the weight of a promise. Violi could hear the confidence in his voice, and for the first time since the invasion began, she felt a flicker of hope. The battle raged on for hours, and soon the Clarens found themselves fighting side by side with the human soldiers, their own spirits reignited by the relentless human assault. The human EXO armor, designed for maximum agility and firepower, was a stark contrast to the Claren technology. Yet, where the Clarens relied on their advanced but rigid technology, the humans adapted quickly to the situation. They improvised in ways that seemed reckless, yet those same risks proved devastatingly effective. Human soldiers moved with an almost chaotic energy, never following the expected patterns of warfare, but always finding a way to turn the tide of battle in their favor. Violi watched as humans darted in and out of cover, taking risks that no other species would dare, and time and again, those risks paid off. What struck Violi the most, however, was not just the humans' adaptability or their ferocity in battle, but their unshakable resolve. They fought as if they had no fear of death, no hesitation in their actions. The Threx had shown no mercy to the Clarens, but the humans, even in the face of overwhelming numbers, held their ground. There was no retreat, no fear. The Clarens, so accustomed to being the dominant force, had forgotten what it was like to fight alongside others who would not falter. The human resolve, unwavering and strong, infused the Claren defenders with renewed courage. Violi could see it in the eyes of her people as they stood tall beside the humans, their confidence slowly returning. The battle was far from over, but at that moment, Violi knew that they were not alone anymore. And perhaps, just perhaps, they might have a chance to win this war. Amidst the chaos of battle, Ambassador Violi found herself beside Private Kira Morgan, a human soldier whose bravery seemed almost reckless. The two of them stood together, shoulder to shoulder, fighting back wave after wave of 3 attackers. Violi marveled at Kira's unyielding determination, the way she moved with precision despite the blood and sweat that matted her brow. The Claren ambassador couldn't fathom why this young human, fragile in comparison to her own species, was willing to risk everything for a people she had never met. The Clarens had fought for their world, for their survival, but they had always been driven by self-preservation. The humans, however, seemed to fight for something more, a sense of duty that extended beyond themselves. During a brief moment of respite, as the two sides paused for a brief lull in the fighting, Violi asked Kira a question that had been nagging at her for hours. "You humans could have stayed away," she said, her voice soft but laced with disbelief. "Why come to our aid when others don't? Why fight for us when we are nothing to you?" Kira wiped the sweat and blood from her face with the back of her hand and gave a weary but resolute smile. There was no hesitation in her answer. "Because it's what we do," Kira said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "When someone's in trouble, we help. Doesn't matter if they're human or not. We don't turn our backs on others in need." Her simple words struck Violi deeply, resonating in a way that no philosophical treatise ever could. It was a truth so pure and straightforward, yet so powerful in its simplicity. For Violi, it was a revelation. She had spent her life surrounded by the complexities of politics, alliances, and negotiations, where every decision was weighed and measured, and every action had a consequence. The Clarens had always believed that their survival depended on influence, power, and the ability to navigate the intricate web of galactic politics. But here was a human, a soldier, who fought not out of strategy or self-interest, but out of an innate sense of compassion and duty. The Clarens had always looked to their allies for help, assuming that strength and resources would win the day. But the humans, with their unassuming nature and flawed yet admirable values, were showing them something far more valuable: the power of mercy, of standing by those who were suffering, simply because it was the right thing to do. As the battle raged on, Violi could not forget Kira's words. They resonated in her mind long after the battle had resumed, lingering in the quiet moments when the noise of war subsided. The humans, so often underestimated by other species, had proved that their strength lay not in their technology or their numbers, but in their willingness to help others, even when it seemed like the odds were impossible. Violi had seen many species in her lifetime, but never one so dedicated to the idea that the struggle of others was worth fighting for. The Clarins had always believed they were alone in their struggles, but now, with the humans standing by them, Violi realized that perhaps the true strength of a civilization lay not in its power or resources, but in the heart and courage of its people. The battle had raged for days, the ground soaked with the blood of both the Clarin defenders and the human soldiers who had thrown themselves into the fight. Despite the constant pressure, Violi found herself standing once more beside Private Kira Morgan. The young soldier, though exhausted and covered in grime, showed no signs of slowing down. It was clear that the fight was not yet won, but Kira's energy seemed inexhaustible, as though she drew strength from a source that Violi couldn't quite understand. In the midst of the madness, Violi found herself unable to reconcile the image of this young, fragile human risking her life for a species she had no connection to, a species she could have easily left to their fate. Violi couldn't help but ask once more, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Why? Why do you do this? Why fight for us, when we are not your people, your allies, your kin? You don't owe us anything." Kira paused for a moment, glancing at Violi with a mix of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. She wiped a smear of blood from her cheek, the effort to do so almost automatic, as if it had become a routine in the midst of this war. Her eyes were unyielding, filled with the same kind of resolve that Violi had seen in her comrades before battle. "It's because it's not about who you are or where you come from," Kira said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming exhaustion. "It's about helping those who need it. We don't ask questions about who deserves our help, only if they need it." For a moment, Violi stood speechless, taking in Kira's words. There was something in the simplicity of the answer that struck her deeply. The humans did not care about the race, the past, or the politics of those they helped. They did not look for reasons to justify their actions or wait for the perfect moment to offer their aid. They acted because they believed that when others were in need, it was their duty to answer, regardless of the risks or the cost. Violi had spent her life negotiating and calculating, measuring every move in terms of what could be gained or lost. But here, in the midst of this brutal battle, Kira's answer seemed to redefine everything she had ever known about sacrifice and duty. The humans were not motivated by advantage or strategy. They were motivated by something deeper, something that transcended any political gain or material benefit. Violi's heart was heavy with a new understanding. The Clarins, in all their power and influence, had never known what it meant to fight for something beyond their own survival. They had always assumed that others would come to their aid, that alliances and connections would be enough to ensure their survival. But the humans, with their relatively small numbers and their newly emerged status in the galaxy, had shown her something entirely different. They had not waited for others to act or for the odds to shift in their favor. They had simply chosen to fight because it was the right thing to do. And in that moment, as Violi watched Kira and the other human soldiers continue their relentless fight, she understood that the greatest strength the humans had was not their technology, but their unwavering commitment to something more: compassion, unity, and a determination to protect those in need, no matter the cost. With the Threx finally pushed back, the victory on Clera came at a terrible cost. The battlefield, once a scene of intense conflict, now lay quiet, but the silence was only a stark reminder of the devastation. Human ships, once sleek and aggressive, now lay scattered across the planet's surface, wrecked and broken from the brutal fight. The human soldiers who had fought beside the Clarins, so full of life and determination just hours before, were now lying motionless in the dirt, their bodies the final testament to their sacrifice. Among the fallen was Private Kira Morgan, whose courage had been undeniable, her actions pivotal in ensuring the survival of those around her. Violi stood over her body, feeling a deep sorrow as she looked at the young human soldier, her lifeless form a symbol of the cost of this victory. Kira had been among those who had risked everything, shielding a group of Clarin children from an explosive blast, giving her life in the process. Violi couldn't help but feel a wave of guilt wash over her. It was humanity that had come to the Clarens' aid when no one else had, and in doing so, they had suffered immeasurably. Violi had learned that Kira's kind of sacrifice wasn't something that could be measured by the value of lives lost, but by the immeasurable impact of their actions. In a battle where survival seemed uncertain, the humans had fought with a selflessness that Violi had never seen before. The Claren people owed them more than they could ever repay, and yet the humans had never asked for anything in return. They had acted out of sheer compassion, with no expectation of reward. As Violi watched the human survivors, tending to their wounded and honoring their dead, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and admiration. The humans, even in the face of their tremendous loss, carried themselves with quiet dignity. There was no fanfare, no grand speeches of victory. They simply continued to care for one another, to heal their wounded, and to mourn their dead. It was in these small acts of humanity, helping the injured, sharing supplies, offering words of comfort, that Violi saw the true character of these people. Their strength did not lie in their weapons or tactics, but in their ability to endure, to stand together in the face of tragedy, and to rise above the chaos. As the last of the human forces prepared to leave Clera, Violi stood with Captain Darius Locke one final time. The time for words of gratitude seemed insufficient. The Clarens owed their survival to the humans, to the sacrifice and bravery of their soldiers. But what could they say? What could they offer in return for the unthinkable loss? Violi's voice trembled as she spoke, her heart heavy with emotion. "You saved us," she said, her words simple yet profound. "At great cost to your own people. Why did you come for us? Why answer when no one else did?" Locke's gaze was steady as he met her eyes, his response clear and resolute. "Because if we didn't, who would?" he said simply. "Humanity knows what it's like to stand alone, to be underestimated. We won't let others face that if we can help it." And as the human fleet began to disappear into the stars, Violi knew that the Clarens would never forget the humans, not just for saving their lives, but for showing them what it truly meant to stand together, to offer mercy when it was needed most. As the human fleet disappeared into the stars, Violi stood on the now silent battlefield, the weight of the past days settling heavily upon her. The destruction of Clera had been staggering, but the survivors, both human and Claren, had managed to hold onto something more precious than their cities or their weapons: their unity. The cost had been immense, lives lost on both sides, yet the bond forged in battle between the Clarens and humans would last far beyond the war itself. Violi looked up at the empty sky, the same sky that had once been filled with fire and smoke, now eerily calm. She had never imagined that one day, in her lifetime, the Clarens would find themselves saved not by their allies or their superior technology, but by a species so young and so untested. The humans had shown the Clarens something extraordinary. They had not come seeking glory or fame, nor had they come to secure a political advantage. They had come simply because the Clarens had called out for help, and the humans had answered. In doing so, they had displayed an unwavering commitment to their ideals, ideals that were simple but profound. Humanity had reminded Violi of the importance of solidarity, of what it truly meant to help others in need without calculation or expectation. In all her years of diplomacy, she had never encountered such pure selflessness. It was a trait that transcended race, culture, and history. It was a force that even the greatest civilizations could not fully grasp until they had seen it in action. The weight of Kira's sacrifice lingered in Violi's mind, a poignant reminder of the human spirit. Kira had not hesitated when the moment of crisis arrived. She had given everything for the Claren children, and in doing so, had embodied the values that the humans held dear. Violi found herself deeply moved by the realization that, in the end, it wasn't the advanced weapons or technology that had won the war, but the willingness to stand in harm's way for someone else. The Clarens, despite their history of power and influence, had never truly understood the depth of such self-sacrifice. But now, with the blood of their people mingling with the human soldiers on the battlefield, they had been given a new perspective, one that would stay with them for generations to come. The Clarens had always been proud of their connections, their wealth, and their influence. They had relied on these attributes to secure their place in the galaxy, believing that these things would always ensure their survival. But now, after witnessing humanity's intervention, Violi understood the truth. Survival was not assured by wealth or power, but by something far more fundamental. It was the strength of character, the ability to act when it mattered most, to show up when others would not, that made a civilization truly remarkable. The humans had given the Clarens not just a second chance, but a new vision of what it meant to be part of the galaxy, a vision built not on influence, but on compassion and duty to others. In the quiet after the battle, Violi addressed the remaining members of the Claren Council, her voice steady despite the weight in her chest. They had lost so much, but they had also gained something invaluable, a debt to humanity that could never be repaid. "We owe them more than we can ever give back," she said, her words resonating with the truth she had come to understand. "But we will honor them. We will carry forward their example, and we will stand with those in need, just as they stood with us." As the Clarens began to rebuild, Violi knew that the legacy of this war would not just be one of destruction, but of transformation. The Clarens would never forget what the humans had done for them. In the years to come, the memory of that sacrifice would guide their actions, reminding them that true power lay not in wealth or influence, but in the willingness to extend a hand when no one else would.